Come on, sit here for a while, Jackie. Watch some TV with me. Let's just sit here for a while. Okay?
Gotta believe in me. Always late. Here. Get out of our way. Stop.
On this season of The Ultimate Fighter, 16 of the country's best unsigned mixed martial arts fighters are about to get the opportunity of a lifetime.
Do you want to be a fighter? That's the question.
I'm an instigator.
Probably because he's jealous because titties got titties and he ain't got no titties.
Hey, man! I want to do that, man. I can't let you get close.
What, you gonna do something about it? What are you gonna do? Do something then. Do something then. Do something then.
If you watched cable TV in the early 2000s, you'll recall that it was the worst era for televisual entertainment since the 1800s, when poverty-stricken street urchins stared at their own pox-riddled reflections in a puddle and pretended it was a television. It was also probably the last time you watched cable TV. For decades, producing shows required the hiring of actors, writers, directors, all those things that made actual TV shows like Friends or Buffy the cultural dreadnoughts of the 90s. But TV companies were painfully aware of how much it cost to produce the average season of something like Friends, where each friend was paid $1 million per episode to act like they actually liked each other, and that Ross wasn't a sociopathic cannibal. All the evidence is hiding in plain sight, I'm just saying look into it. If only there was some way to make a TV show with compelling characters, but not have to pay them, write a script for them, or even direct them. The answer to every TV executive's satanic chanting came in the early 2000s, when TV would come to be dominated by that syndicated harbinger of the apocalypse, reality TV. The seed had been planted way back in the early 90s when a former Chicago mayor named Jerry Springer ruled the airwaves. Springer summoned forth the finest examples of trailer park wildlife in order to humiliate them for ratings, and so his audience could feel a bit better about themselves.
Hard as a rock, man. Let me show you something.
In the mid-90s, former music channel and current reality TV spawn point MTV struck gold when they came up with the vaguely creepy idea of filming people's everyday lives and serializing it.
This is the true story
True story.
of 7 strangers.
Pick to live in a house.
And have their lives too.
Lucy, I'm home.
The Real World is considered by most TV experts to be the first ever reality TV series, and by most theologists as the opening of the seventh seal. MTV's programming would eventually become so heavily reliant on reality TV that nowadays the M in MTV is purely decorative. The unfathomable success of the Jerry Springer Show and The Real World made them the blueprint for what was to come. No actors were needed, no scripts were needed, and no intelligence on the part of the viewer was needed. All of this led to the eventual nexus point of reality TV, Big Brother, in 2000. From that point onwards, reality TV shows were to cable TV what the trending section is to YouTube, a depressing morass of cheaply produced trash that would dominate viewing habits for the next 2 decades, only with slightly less shock faces. But cheaply produced trash that generated higher ratings than if O.J. Simpson's white Bronco had been filled with strippers and Nazi gold was exactly what the UFC was looking for to save them from complete financial ruin.
Hi, Kara. It's Patty and Candace. So tell us how the date went with Luke.
Well, the date went really well in the beginning.
What's the problem?
And, well, he was a little disrespectful. He was like, Kara, do you spit or swallow? And I was just like, excuse me?
Do you rather swallow or spit, girl?
What? That's inappropriate. Kara, thank you for stepping up and telling us the truth.
I just think that he's used to girls that'll just give it up.
Yeah, well, of course he is. He's a UFC dog. He needs to be curbed.
見せてもらおうか。
The year is 1993. Street Fighter II is the hottest shit in the arcades. Metallica just released their last half-decent album before filing for Chapter 11 creative bankruptcy, and members of a Brazilian family are living in Torrance, California, and offering to test their homegrown martial art, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, against all other styles. A man named Art Davey has just seen a series of sketchy VHS tapes of what looks like guys in white pajamas murdering people in their garage. Those pajama-clad asphyxiation enthusiasts were the Gracies. Davey approaches Hori and Gracie with the idea of turning these Gracie garage strangulation sessions into an IRL Mortal Kombat tournament, packaged, sold, and televised to the public at large. The UFC was born. Fast forward to 1997, and the UFC fanbase is expanding more rapidly than Tito's head.
You're a fucking punk, dude.
The promotion has abandoned the Mortal Kombat tournament structure in favour of weight classes and championship belts, and we even got cornerstones of the UFC such as Bruce Buffer, the Just Bleed guy, and the leaked beta version of Joe Rogan. But the UFC had an image problem, and it isn't just Dana White's teeth and hair. No-holds-barred fighting is banned in most states thanks to politicians confusing it with the shitty Hulk Hogan movie of the same name and banning the wrong one. Senator John McCain is deeply worried that his earnings from Budweiser, boxing's largest sponsor, would suffer if MMA ever became bigger than boxing. Oh, sorry. I mean, he was deeply concerned that impressionable children would be exposed to Tank Abbott, Face the Pain, and the powerhouse acting of Ken Shamrock.
I've heard all the hype. I've seen all the press. It's time to step into the octagon and see if Shamrock can't tame Dan the Beast Severn.
The UFC, in an effort to get uncancelled, set about cleaning up their image. By 2000, all mention of stuff like there are no rules and no holds barred, the bedrock of the UFC's image up till then, were scrubbed from existence. Thanks to McCain's meddling, the unified rules of mixed martial arts were grudgingly adopted. Headbutts, hair pulling and groin strikes were banned. More weight classes were introduced, as were 5-minute rounds and the 10-point must scoring system. If you squinted, the UFC almost looked like a legitimate sport. But for many older fans, these rule changes were a bigger turn-off than a Steven Seagal sex mix. Even the patron saint of professional fisting, the Just Bleed guy, drifted away from the sport once it became sanitized and sportified. In an interview with Bloody Elbow, James Ladner, aka the Just Bleed guy, the man whose grimacing face and pornographic level of flexing made him the unofficial mascot of the UFC and official mascot of this channel, explained that the adoption of all these rules killed his interest in MMA to such an extent that this man, a guy who looks like what would happen if a tap-out shirt made a wish to become a real boy, is now an accountant who hasn't watched MMA since the 1990s. Old fans like Ladner drifted away from the UFC as it became more mainstream, but worryingly, new fans weren't arriving to replace them. By 2005, the UFC were putting on better and better shows, the skill level of competitors was evolving, and the days of fighters like Harold Howard were over.
Come on!
Fighters like Chuck Liddell, BJ Penn, Randy Couture, and Tito Ortiz were the vanguard of a new era for the UFC, yet the UFC was still about as palatable to the public as Tyron Woodley's singing career.
I'm so in love with you. I'm so done with you, but I'm still in love with you.
Bass drop, bass drop.
I'm so in love with you. I'm so done with you, but I'm still in love with you. A whole goddamn day, now we back at it. I can't take all this madness. I can't stomach all this damn issue. Get on my goddamn nerves. Falling in and out of love. I'm crazy in love with you. Falling in and out of love, in and out of love with you.
In 2001, the UFC had been bought for $2 million by casino owners and legitimate businessmen Frank and Lorenzo Fertitta. By 2004, they had sunk $40 million into the UFC and still not seen a single cent of profit. In Japan, MMA was thriving. Pride was selling out the Tokyo Dome and its fighters were rock stars. But in America, MMA was still a fringe sport, enjoyed mostly by screaming lunatics like Ladner. With the UFC on life support, the Fertittas injected their final $10 million shot into what they hoped would be the savior of the UFC, a reality TV show called The Ultimate Fighter. As of 2022, The Ultimate Fighter, or TUF for short, has ran for more seasons than the 100 Years' War. There are 30 seasons in total, that's more seasons than Game of Thrones, Star Trek The Next Generation, Buffy, and Stranger Things combined. TUF has existed for so long that it can be categorized into its own distinct eras. Seasons 1 to 6 are the we don't know what the fuck we're doing era, when the UFC were just throwing Chuck and Randy at a wall to see what sticks, and TUF still had a stink of reality shows like Survivor. Seasons 7 to 14 are the Revenant years, so called because the show had been around long enough that its early contestants were now returning as coaches themselves, and the UFC were experimenting with themed seasons such as Team UK versus Team US. Everything from season 15 onwards is what I like to call the uninterrupted decline into irrelevance era, when despite the occasional flash of greatness, the show began to lose whatever spark it once had. There are too many seasons to cover each one in detail, and some seasons simply aren't worth talking about, so instead we're going to look at each era of TUF and take a look at the best seasons of each era and the most notable fighters they produced, in an attempt to try and understand how a TV show that was once so vital to the UFC's existence is now treated the same way Metallica treated Jason Newsted. For this video, we're going to focus on the single most important moment in all of TUF history, and that's the season that saved the UFC, Season 1. That Season 1 of TUF ever happened at all is a God-given miracle. The Fertittas were shopping the idea of TUF around every network that would let them in the door. But the idea gathered less interest than an audiobook narrated by Tito Ortiz. After being rejected by every network that mattered and some that didn't, the Fertittas approached a new network called Spike. And I don't know about you, but that advert made me grow an extra testicle. I now have 4. Spike was a network solely aimed at cool dudes who liked cool things, like gambling, breasts of varying sizes, light machine guns, and the manliest pastime of all.
You better win your fight, because I'm coming on your ass, boy. I'm coming for that ass.
Because I want to fight with Chuck.
Oh, you're trying to be cool. Yeah, I used to guys like you in high school.
Wait, go. Take care of your underwears. I'm gonna you, man.
Am I the biggest pussy you have ever met and you want me to suck your dick?
Yeah, I'm gonna put you in shame. Do it. No, I'm gonna wait. Do it. And enjoy it slowly. Do it. Slowly, day by day. Slowly, day by day. It's so funny. Yeah.
Hard as a rock, man. Let me show you something.
It seemed like a lock that a network like Spike would pick up on the idea of 16 macho men doing macho shit, but Spike turned down the UFC and instead went with an idea hotter than the Earth's core. Imagine basketball, and now imagine basketball on a trampoline. Slam ball is like one of those fever dream ideas that video game designers had in the 90s, where all the most extreme sports were combined into a homunculus of downhill speedball, snowboard, fight shooting. And it's what Spike were betting would be the next big hit, and not this ultimate fighting nonsense. The Fertittas were dumbstruck. Their last hope had just shot them down in favour of an idea that sounded like it had been discovered on the door of a Dave & Buster's toilet. In a last-ditch effort, the Fertittas approached Spike once more and pitched a revised idea: ultimate fighting on trampolines. The Fertittas actually pitched the idea of paying for the entire season of TUF themselves and offering it completely free to Spike. All they had to do was air it. Once they heard the word free, Spike were on board, and season 1 of TUF was go. Episode 1 of TUF aired on April 9th, 2005. The first thing you'll notice about TUF is that its marketing is so extreme, it's in danger of being put on an FBI watch list. There's scenes of projectile vomit, blood, knockouts, and scantily clad women, and we're still only in the fucking intro. Fighters aren't referred to as mixed martial artists, but ultimate fighters. They don't even call it MMA. It's almost always referred to as ultimate fighting.
We love the ultimate.
The UFC wants you to know that this is the dark souls of reality TV, and it is not for casuals. TUF continues its relentless assault on your senses with that goddamn theme tune. It sounds like Linkin Park's worst song being covered by Limp Bizkit, and in 2005 it would have been found on all good file sharing applications next to the Rampage rap and would actually have been a virus. In actuality, this musical monster energy drink was created by a guy called Jared Mendelsohn, a man whose only other musical credit I can find is composing the soundtrack for Command and Conquer Tiberian Sun. We're introduced to the 16 fighters who make up the contestants, and for anyone familiar with MMA of the late 2000s, the TUF 1 lineup is like a stroll down memory loss lane. The TUF 1 lineup was basically an all-star team consisting of Diego Sanchez, Forrest Griffin, Josh Koscheck, Nate Quarry, Kenny Florian, Stefan Bonner, Chris Lieben, and Mike Swick. All men who would go on to have successful UFC careers, but this was 17 years ago, long before any of them found fame in the octagon, and the two men tasked with moulding these unrefined talents into real ultimate fighters are coaches Jack Liddell and Randy Couture. There is another man whose malign influence can be felt all over season 1, like a Sith Lord with an arts degree, and that's Craig Piligian. You won't see him on the show, but if you watched season 1 and were wondering why the fighters were taking part in ridiculous team elimination challenges like speed sawing logs or carrying the coaches across Lake Mead in an armchair, you can thank Craig. Pelagian was the creator of the reality TV/game show Survivor and the producer of TUF. It was his idea to add all the trappings of mid-2000s reality TV such as challenges, immunity and eliminations into the only reality TV show where people were already literally fighting each other to stay on the show. Another staple of 2000s reality TV was having this woman host the show. I don't know who the fuck she is, do you? Apparently she was Jack Liddell's girlfriend, and also she did some singing and or Playboy. Either way, much like the challenges, she's as pointless an addition as a HR department on the Death Star. It takes barely 10 minutes into episode 1 for Chris Lieben to assert his position as the alpha dickhead in the house.
Chris was up yelling, doing this, doing that, drunk, making a total fool out of himself.
Man, you should hop in the shower, bro. Hey, Pokemon, did you shower yet?
I'm going right now.
Those guys were really boring. Very boring, yes. Boring as f***. They have no personality at all. Nobody does in here.
For better or worse, Lieben was the biggest personality on the show, a man who could flit from being a bully to a broken young man haunted by more demons than the Doomslayer, depending on how much he'd had to drink that episode. You see, TUF 1 took place in a time when the UFC valued entertainment and ratings more than the physical safety of the contestants. So this pressure cooker of violent young men with nothing to do in between training sessions was stocked with more booze than an Irish funeral.
My boy Chris just starts getting hammered. He's a character, man.
Who's with me?
Lieben's a wild man. He went pretty crazy.
Like any successful bully, he has a talent for finding the weakest in the group. And in season 1 of TUF, that weak link came in the form of a quiet, unassuming Canadian named Jason Thacker. In the years since TUF 1 aired, Lieben has stated that going into season 1, most of the contestants were pretty much guys talented enough that the UFC had already been scouting them. They were fighting on the regional circuits, and some like Lieben and Mike Swick had already fought each other before coming into the house. The majority of the TUF contestants were destined for the UFC regardless of the outcome of the show. The odd man out was Thacker. He would later admit in an interview with Bloody Elbows' Chuck Middenhall that he had never trained MMA before joining the cast of TUF. Thacker had no gym and trained in an abandoned truck stop in the middle of nowhere in British Columbia. He had fought in a few unsanctioned boxing matches, and upon hearing that the UFC were casting a reality TV show called The Ultimate Fighter, Thacker sent in the only existing video of one of his fights. The showrunners knew Thacker wasn't at the same skill level as the rest of the cast and used him as an example of what happened when an average Joe tried ultimate fighting. Nicknamed Strange Brew in episode 1 by a drunk Lieben.
Right? Hey, if you're Strange Brew, it's done been said. Once it's said, it's through.
Thacker was remarkable for being completely unremarkable. In a house full of alpha bros, the inexperienced and socially awkward Thacker was always going to be the target for bullying. Lieben wasted no time zeroing in on his target. After an evening spent making fun of Thacker, Lieben waited until he was showering and for the coup de grace, pissed on his bed. The sight of Jason Thacker unwittingly sleeping on a pillow of Lieben's piss is genuinely uncomfortable to watch, and even 17 years later still makes me feel deeply sorry for Jason Thacker. He would last for 2 entire episodes despite almost dying from exhaustion during Hell Week, when the coaches worked their fighters to the brink of death to gauge their fitness.
I'm just struggling just to keep going here. I've had some, some worries, some trepidation on whether I should even continue or cut my losses and stuff. But we'll see.
In episode 2, after failing the coach's challenge, Team Couture unsurprisingly voted to send Thacker home. He would return for the Ultimate Fighter finale, where he got his chance for revenge in a fight against Chris Lieben. Lieben TKO'd him within the first minute. and that was the last time Jason Thacker ever competed in Ultimate Fighting. Back on the show, confusion reigned as the fighters didn't even know that they were expected to fight for their place in the house. One of the contestants, Bobby Southworth, said, "The way it was explained to us was that it was going to be kind of like a Survivor thing, where we went through all these different types of challenges, and then whoever the last two guys in the weight class were at the end of the show, those were the guys that were going to fight. This was what we were told. Nobody was expecting to fight." The first two fighters to leave the show had been voted off, so when the fighters found out in episode 3 that not only did they have to take part in the ridiculous elimination challenges, now they were also required to fight. And on top of that, they weren't going to be paid for said fights. Unsurprisingly, nobody was enthusiastic about fighting. Dana arrived to harangue the troops and delivered what historians agree upon as the most stirring motivational speech of the 20th century.
Let me explain something to everybody. This is a very, and when I say very, I can't explain to you what a unique opportunity this is. You have nothing to worry about every day, except coming in and getting better at what supposedly you want to do for a living. Big deal, the guy sleeping next to you stinks. He's drunk all night, making noise and you can't sleep. You got roommates. We picked who we believe are the best guys in this country right now. We did. And you guys are it. Act like it, man. Do you want to be a fighter? That's the question. That's why I'm here. It's not about cutting weight. It's not about living in a house. It's about, do you want to be a fighter? It's not all signing autographs and banging broads when you get out of here. It's not. It's no fun, man. It's a job, just like any other job. So the question is, not did you think you had to make weight? Did you think you had to do this? Do you want to be a fighter? That is my question. And only you know that. Anybody who says they don't, I don't want you here. And I'll throw you the out of this gym so fast your head will spin. It's up to you. I don't care. Cool? I love you all. That's why you're here. Have a good night, gentlemen.
It's on. Let's go.
Further cementing the reputation that early 2000s MMA had the same regard for safety as a mosh pit, Bobby Southworth was required to cut 22 pounds in 24 hours in order to make weight for his fight. In scenes that would get any TV show cancelled faster than the average Paramount Plus subscription if it aired today, Southworth spent hours cycling on a stationary bike inside the sauna to the point where he could no longer stand. His half-dead corpse is literally dragged feet first back into the sauna by one of the greatest MMA trolls of all time, Josh Koscheck.
At 210 degrees in there for an hour, that's gonna break you. Whether you're the toughest man on the face of this earth, it's gonna break you at some point, and he broke.
Koscheck and Chuck Liddell proceed to lock Southworth in the sauna while making fun of Southworth for almost dying like a little bitch.
He already knows he's over, yet he's not trying to cut. He's just laying around and bitching about it. Do you want to be a fighter? That is my question.
Weight cutting is a serious issue in MMA, and fighters have died due to complications from huge weight cuts. Koscheck essentially gambled with Southworth's life by dragging him back into that sauna. But this was 2000s MMA, baby, and it was ultimate.
We love the ultimate.
If you died, you were a pussy who probably didn't even train UFC. Unbelievably, Southworth would cut the 20 pounds and go on to win his fight by 12-second KO. Season 1 peaks with episode 5, when Dana decides to just raw dog the mid-2000s aesthetic by taking the entire group to see a Kid Rock concert.
I just don't want these guys getting too drunk.
Foreshadowing is a narrative device in which suggestions or warnings about events to come are dropped or planted.
Confirming that Kid Rock's music can only ever make any given situation worse, the fighters return home absolutely steaming, shit-faced, 3 sheets to the wind, plastered, buckled, bollocks, flutered, scuttered, rotten, tit-faced. Drutworth demands everyone in attendance keep a code of silence about Diego's break with reality.
Nobody on our team talks about this.
which rudely interrupts Lieben's uber-casual outdoor piss. In a display of machismo, the likes of which normally ends with someone seeing red and bodies just start dropping, bro, the two men trade hostilities until their exchange of words plunges the evening into pure chaotic evil when Southworth calls Chris Lieben a
fatherless bastard.
Lieben had only just met his father for the first time a few weeks before going into the TUF house. They met up in a bar. Lieben's dad borrowed $100 from him and then disappeared. So Southworth's fatherless bastard comment was a lit match thrown into the powder keg of the TUF house. Lieben proceeds to break down harder than a cancelled influencer and was consoled by Nate Quarry, one of the few genuine good guys in the house.
Nate's out there tending to the crybaby. I lost respect, man. How am I gonna sleep? Crybaby.
Quarry, acting like the greatest wingman anyone could ever ask for, talked Lieben down from full-scale war and incredibly actually managed to convince him to go sleep it off. Lieben passed out, wrapped in a blanket on the front lawn. Everyone in the TUF house breathed a sigh of relief at narrowly avoiding a total catastrophe.
I'm an instigator.
It takes a special kind of asshole to make you feel sympathetic for a guy who only a few episodes ago pissed on someone's bed and strut around the TUF house like an apex bully. Josh Koscheck is that asshole. Koscheck might be the single biggest prick in MMA history, and yet I still can't bring myself to hate the guy. He creates absolute chaos and does it all with this dumb, goofy charm, like a toddler with a flamethrower. Koscheck convinces Southworth that it would be a great idea to soccer kick a hornet's nest and hose Lieben down with water while he sleeps. Lieben took it quite well, all things considered.
Chris is losing blood.
You know what? The show's over because I'll go to jail living with that mother.
Lieben punched his way through a glass door, removing most of his knuckle in the process, crashed through Forrest Griffin's bedroom door like a steaming drunk Kool-Aid man, while Southworth doubled over with laughter directly behind him. Koscheck's response? It's just a prank, bro.
The guy, he's already had a rough night. Whatever, dude. It's a prank. If you can't live up to it, he's gonna cry. That.
I'm an instigator.
As a punishment for the incident, alcohol was removed from the house, and Lieben was forced to fight Koscheck, despite the fact that his knuckle looked like a freshly sliced ham. Koscheck wrestle-humped his way to victory, and then proceeded to put on a Hall of Fame display of how to win a fight, yet still be saltier than the Dead Sea about it.
Good job, Koscheck. That's your ticket home, baby. Take your bus ticket home.
Go home! Hold me down, you little Go home! I'm not done with you yet, Josh! I'm not done with you yet!
Let's go.
Unlike later seasons, in the WTF era, losing fighters actually left the show completely. So with Lieben gone, the house could return to some semblance of normality. No more bed pissing, bullying and all-night drinking sessions. You can practically feel the tension dissipate as Lieben's van drives away. Nate Quarry had injured his ankle in an earlier episode, unable to continue. Quarry was allowed to bring back one cast member, and of course, he brought back Lieben. But with the finale so close, and a 6-figure contract with the UFC on the line, even Chris the Piss Lieben behaved himself, and the next episodes were relatively uneventful. Chris Lieben only lasted one more episode before being eliminated in the semi-final by Kenny Florian.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
I'm just glad that Lieben's gone again. Yeah.
Lieben, Koscheck and Southworth's antics throughout the season meant that most of the other contestants got the short end of the wedge when it came to camera time. So by the time the finale rolled around, most of the finalists were people we hadn't really gotten to know very well. The most notable thing Stephan Bonnar had done all season was when he argued with Diego Sanchez about whether or not Diego had stolen his asparagus. Likewise, Diego Sanchez, a man so deeply strange he would normally dominate the runtime of any show in which he was a contestant, hadn't really been given a lot of airtime. Kenny Florian may as well have been part of the furniture, and Forrest Griffin, while not given much airtime, had come across as a likeable, goofy everyman whenever he had been on screen. Ultimately, these four men who had kind of blended into the background for the majority of the season would be the ones fighting for the contract at the TUF Live finale. Diego Sanchez versus Kenny Florian at middleweight, and Forrest Griffin versus Stephan Bonnar at light heavyweight. The TUF Live finale aired on April 9th, 2005. If you haven't seen a TUF finale before, the format consists of eliminated contestants fighting each other in the hopes that Dana White Senpai will notice them and give them another shot. Then the finalists of the show will compete for the UFC contract, and it's all capped off with a main event between two big-name fighters. For the TUF 1 finale, its main event was a fight between former math teacher turned MMA fighter Rich Franklin and a man who owned a really nice waistcoat, Ken Shamrock.
It's time to step into the octagon.
Diego Sanchez knocked out Kenny Florian in round 1 of their fight to claim his place as the first TUF champion. An impressive win for sure, but for TV audiences, many of them who might have been watching MMA for the first time, a relatively quick KO didn't give them enough time to appreciate what MMA was about. All that would change with the next fight, Griffin versus Bonnar. Most people weren't expecting much from this fight. It was kind of viewed as something we all had to get out of the way with before the real fight everyone came to see, Franklin versus Shamrock. Both Griffin and Bonnar had decent, but not especially noteworthy runs on the show, and in the case of Bonnar, he had pretty much been gifted a judge's decision over Bobby Southworth, a fight almost everyone agreed he should have lost. Griffin wasn't even supposed to be in the house. When he got the call from the UFC, he had actually been retired from MMA after breaking his arm in his last fight. He was living the life of a small town cop in Georgia and had only gotten the call after the UFC's first pick for the show had been dropped for failing a drug test. Most people expected a fairly tepid fight, assuming Griffin would stand and strike, while Bonnar, who had won his last fight in the house via triangle choke, would utilise his jiu-jitsu. Nobody got what they were expecting. Griffin v Bonnar is one of those 3-round fights that feels like a 5-rounder. It isn't the greatest fight in MMA history from a purely technical point of view, as both men are exhausted by round 3, and both are throwing so wildly that at times it seems sloppy. At one point, Griffin literally gets a running start to throw a haymaker. But this fight sent the message the UFC had been trying to convey to home audiences for over a decade, that the UFC, and this fledgling sport of MMA, was home to the toughest breed of fighters on the planet. Almost 4 years to the day before Griffin v Bonnar, Prince Nassim Hamed had fought Marco Antonio Barrera in one of the biggest boxing matches of the era. A documentary called Little Prince, Big Fight followed all of his preparation for the match, and it's worth watching just to see Prince Nassim disappear up his own arse like an Ouroboros with an anal fixation. Nassim's fight prep is a monument to ego and excess. He focuses more on his haircut than his training.
Working on Nas is like a work of art.
And his ring entrance sees him quite literally descend Christ-like from the rafters, blessing us plebeians with his princely aura. 4 years later, Griffin v Bonnar was a stark contrast. This was two blue-collar guys taking a day off from their 9-to-5s and staging full-scale war in an arena so small it looks like you could barely fit the Dennis Seaver fan club inside. Suddenly, boxing with its countless weight classes, organizations and inflated egos seemed incredibly old-fashioned. Two complete nobodies had just put on the kind of war that boxing hadn't seen since the 1980s. This was pure punk rock. This was the combat sport of the next generation. In MMA's first true water cooler moment, both men seemed like they were legitimately fighting for their lives. People called their friends mid-fight to ask them were they seeing this shit. As each round passed, ratings were rocketing. The fight was going viral in real time, and in a pre-social media era, that wasn't an easy thing to accomplish. Think of the best fight you've ever seen in the UFC. Think of your favourite fighter, all the highs and lows you've experienced following their journey. Whether it was Conor's 13-second KO of Aldo, or Jones' domination of the light heavyweight division, maybe you had one of the most memorable nights of your life seeing Ronda lose to Holly Holm or Michael Bisping finally win a world title. The individual nature of this sport and its personalities gives you the kind of highs and lows no other sport truly can. And now imagine a world where none of that happened. Because while the UFC's ship had been sinking ever since it was purchased by Zuffa in 2001, every second of Griffin v Bonner that passed was bailing it out. The UFC were offered a second season of TUF almost immediately, and this time, Spike was paying for it. The mood among the Fertittas and Dana White post-fight was that they had finally turned things around. Without that fight, the UFC as we know it may not have existed. And with the imminent collapse of Pride in Japan, it's impossible to calculate just how much we as fans owe to Forrest Griffin and Stephan Bonnar. Griffin was declared the winner, but Bonnar was also offered a contract thanks to his performance that night. Both men claimed their spot in the UFC and cemented their legacy in mixed martial arts. Ken Shamrock lost to Rich Franklin in a main event that was more forgettable than an Imagine Dragons soundtrack for a movie about amnesia, because all anyone could talk about was Griffin v Bonnar. The Fertittas' final 10 million gamble had paid off.
We are giving you
everything they have. Could we be blessed with a third round? Tonight, history will be made for the first time in the history. Stephan Bonnar trains under the legendary Carlson Gracie.
Yeah.
Production wrapped up, and for the winners and losers of TUF, life returned to normal. The big names from season 1 like Diego Sanchez, Kenny Florian and Nate Quarry all found a spot in the UFC. Some, like Southworth, would never make it to the big leagues, but had a relatively successful career in Strikeforce. Other contestants like Chris Sanford would fade away from the sport more or less entirely and become destined for "Where Are They Now" articles and footnotes in one of MMA's most important moments. But for one contestant, returning to normal life wasn't as easy as that once the cameras were off. Jason Thacker returned to his abandoned truck stop in British Columbia, but if he was expecting a hero's welcome, or any kind of welcome at all, he was mistaken. He returned home with a target on his back. For Jason Thacker, TUF ruined his life, a fact that he freely admits. Guys from local gyms would seek him out and attack him, angry that he had failed to represent Canadian MMA. He was smashed in the face with a pipe at his local bar, breaking his nose and cracking a tooth in the process. Other guys would start fights with him just for the sake of it, to say they'd beaten up an ultimate fighter. He considered continuing his MMA career, but found out pretty quickly that people just wanted to use him as a punching bag, as he was only offered fights against vastly more experienced fighters. He was to be the can that gets crushed. Thacker escaped the bullying at the TUF House, only to be bullied by his entire country. Even Pride commentator Mauro Ranallo, who grew up in Maple Ridge, near where Thacker lives, had harsh words for Jason when he said he should make like Canada's version of a milk carton and disappear. Thacker had to change phones, he was getting so many death threats. He said, "When the harassment began and all that, I pretty much lost all my friends. I really don't have any friends anymore. I already had social anxiety and stuff, but I still hung out with people. They went away because they didn't want to get caught up in my mess." Jason revealed that during the filming of the show, he had been going through withdrawal from prescription medications for anxiety and depression the entire time it was filming. He had only been given 1 day to prepare and had forgotten to pack all of his medications before flying down from Canada. The showrunners did nothing to help him when he had told them about it. Thacker's fight with Lieben at the finale was his attempt at some kind of redemption. He asked for the fight himself. In order to get sanctioned to fight in Las Vegas, however, he needed a team and a corner. The UFC set him up in a gym called Gibson Pancration, where his training partners proceeded to go full blast on him in every sparring session, just to ram home the point that he wasn't one of them. The coach, Lance Gibson, wouldn't even corner him. Dana White comes in for a lot of grief, most of it coming from me, but from time to time, even I have to swallow my pride and admit that underneath the blazing red tomato face and steroid gut, he's actually capable of being a pretty good guy. When Thacker told White that Gibson wasn't cornering him, White invited him down to Las Vegas to train there and to stay for free in one of the Fertitas casinos. But the Nevada State Athletic Commission wouldn't sanction the fight, as they couldn't verify Thacker's MMA record. Dana organised a Shark Tank display for the commission, where Thacker would spar with fighters one after another so the commission could verify that he knew how to fight. A procession of fighters like Kendall Grove and Mayhem Miller lined up to spar with him until the final sparring partner stepped into the ring, Dana fucking White himself. Dana said, "I'm not putting my name on the line to vouch for you until I see for myself if you can fight." And sure enough, Dana sparred with Thacker, ate some good shots, and gave Jason the nod to fight in the finale. Looking at the results, maybe that wasn't such a great idea, but in a story with very few bright spots, good guy Dana standing up for Jason Thacker when established gyms wouldn't is unexpectedly heartwarming. Jason still lives in British Columbia, and as evidenced by how difficult it was for Bloody Elbow to track him down for his one and only interview post-TUF, he doesn't like being bothered. He keeps to himself and looks after his elderly parents. Living up to the friendly Canadian stereotype, he has no hard feelings or ill will towards Chris Lieben. After the Bloody Elbow article was released, fans rallied together and raised almost $13,000 via a GoFundMe for Jason. He still hits the heavy bag from time to time in his old truck stop, and there are still some people out there trying to help rewrite his story from a punchline to an oddly integral part of one of the most important events in MMA history. While it might sound hyperbolic to say TUF 1 saved the UFC, the numbers back it up. The first season had been a rating success, with the highest rated episode being the fight between Lieben and Koscheck. Sadly for the viewers who tuned in expecting to see some orgiastic explosion of violence, it was 2 rounds of Koscheck wrestle humping. Yeah. But still, the public was watching, and they were now invested in these characters. The TUF Finale pulled in 2.6 million viewers. TUF had brought MMA to a completely new audience, bolstered by its time slot on Spike, who aired TUF directly after WWE's Monday Night Raw. Audience retention between Raw and The Ultimate Fighter was estimated to be around 50%. Post-TUF, pay-per-view sales exploded. The last 3 pay-per-views before the TUF Finale, UFC 49, 50 and 51, had sold a combined total of 225,000 buys. UFC 52, which saw the fight between TUF coaches Chuck Liddell and Randy Couture, aired 1 week after the TUF Finale and sold 300,000 by itself. It was also the highest grossing live gate ever for the time, with over 2 million in ticket sales. In 2004, the UFC earned 14 million in pay-per-view sales for the entire year. For 2005, that number swelled to 48.3 million. By 2006, it was 180 million. This wasn't a natural sales growth, as from 2001 to 2004, pay-per-view sales had more or less stalled and showed barely any growth. Without TUF, if pay-per-view sales had continued in the same trend, it would have taken them 104 years to reach the figure of 522 million that they reached in 2014. I did the math, it checks out. As for the fighters themselves, Griffin was the most successful of the TUF 1 alumni, being the only fighter to win a UFC title, capturing the light heavyweight belt from Jackson at UFC 88. Griffin is one of those fighters with a natural charisma, an easily likable, funny and intelligent guy who's written 2 books and could kick the shit out of you.
I live in Roy's living room on just a mattress, and I don't have medical insurance, and I get beat up for a living.
By the time of his retirement in 2013, Griffin, alongside other UFC veterans Chuck Liddell and Matt Hughes, were given jobs in the UFC as a reward for everything they'd done for the company.
He is staying with the UFC. He will have some role, some title. Hopefully he will work more than Chuck Liddell does.
Some figures say Chuck was earning upwards of $1 million per year. Others put the salary at close to 30 grand per month. While Liddell and Hughes were content to do fuck all and watch the checks roll in, Griffin was wise enough to actually take the job seriously. When the UFC was bought by WME, Liddell and Hughes were out on their asses, but Griffin, the sole fighter who actually turned up for work, was kept on, and is now the Vice President of Athlete Development at the UFC Performance Institute, while Liddell had to go back to Bellator for one of the most depressing fights of all time, when he rematched with Tito Ortiz. Bonner didn't fare quite so well. After his retirement in 2012, he wasn't offered any 30 grand per month gigs like Griffin. I can't say exactly why only one half of the fight that saved the UFC was treated so well by Dana, while the other was cut loose. But Bonner, well, let's just say he doesn't seem quite so easily likable as Griffin. He always came across as, well, a bit weird if I'm being honest. Bonner himself claims the UFC blacklisted him when he failed a drug test after his 2012 loss to Anderson Silva. Maybe that was something to do with it, maybe not. Either way, he unretired in 2014 and fought for Bellator. He only fought once against one of the Easter Island Moai. Oh, wait, sorry, that's just Tito Ortiz's head. Bonner lost the fight via split decision and moved to the world of indie wrestling. In terms of sensibly planning for your retirement, taking up indie wrestling after a 15-year MMA career which saw him run into buzzsaws like a young John Jones and Anderson Silva is the equivalent of quitting alcohol and taking up smoking crack out of the barrel of a loaded shotgun. In recent years, Bonner has had run-ins with the law for DUI, was kicked out of his gym for refusing to wear a mask, and most disturbingly, live-streamed himself getting thrown out of a hospital for demanding painkillers.
I'm at Henderson Hospital, and they're gonna arrest me. They won't treat me because I get prescribed oxycodone 10 milligrams, and I got it filled a few weeks ago. Anyway, last week when I broke my vertebrae pro wrestling off the top rope, God, no! I can't sit, dumb my back's broken. Stephen Bonner, I'm a UFC Hall of Famer. I don't have my license on me or my debit card. You know why? Because the pharmacist at CVS forgot it to give it back to me. You know when? When she was telling me I couldn't get my 7.5 milligram Norcos because, guess why? Because I recently had 10 milligram oxys filled. So they could only give me Tramadol!
Bonner later explained that he had been suffering from a potentially fatal staph infection on top of a broken vertebrae and wrist, the result of a jump off the top rope gone wrong. The tone of sheer desperation that creeps into Bonner's voice at times during this incident just speaks to how the UFC should be preparing post-retirement funds or pensions for these legends of the sport, and not leaving them in situations where they have to sacrifice their bodies even further just to put food on the table. If the UFC can't take care of a fighter who, without hyperbole, saved the entire company from ruin, why should anyone fight for that company? But that's a discussion for another video. The success of TUF 1 spawned 29 more seasons of varying quality and success. For the most part, each season has generally performed worse than the one that preceded it, to the point where the show is now relegated to UFC Fight Pass and is mostly a forgotten relic of a more civilized era. But just because the ratings declined doesn't mean the show stopped being entertaining. It doesn't mean there aren't dozens more fighters whose tough journeys aren't worth discussing, more drunken brawls, more memes, more drama. TUF 1 is just the beginning.
Yeah.
お前に三島を継ぐ権利はない。話にならんわ。生まれ変わって出直してこい。お前に三島を継ぐ権利はない。見せてもらおうか。話にならんわ。お前に三島を継ぐ権利はない。